we're going to hear from Callie Burt. Callie is an Associate Professor of Criminology at Georgia State University in the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies. In addition to her other interests, Callie has a long-standing research interest in sex differences and how these differences are shaped by gender as a social force, and the ways in which law and social policies reflect, reinscribe, or challenge these differences. Her research has been published in various outlets, including the American Journal of Sociology, American Sociological Review, Criminology, Feminist Criminology. So she's published op-eds about issues related to sexism and violence against women in outlets such as the Seattle Times. Callie recently moved to Georgia State University from the University of Washington. She was the recipient of the Young Scholar Award from the American Society of Criminology in 2014. Welcome, Callie.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
So I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And I enjoyed everything that has been discussed so far, and I look forward to our discussions. So I'm usually used to doing a much more formalized presentation where I have some results that I present and I cover them. And so this is a little bit more off the cuff, and I wasn't quite sure what I should discuss. And I had a question about how I got into this topic and how I arrived at some of the same ideas and some very similar, albeit a little bit different conclusions, but with the same gist that the organized women's groups have come to. So to the first, I guess I've always been a little bit confused about the increasing LGBTQ IASS++ alphabet that was growing, but I understood the purpose of this alliance to be, sorry? Oh, I understand the purpose of this alliance to be really allowing people to live as they wanted to live and present how they are and be who they are as long as they were consenting adults and no one was harmed. And so I thought, okay, that's the rationale for this alliance. And can everyone see me? Because I see other faces. Okay, great. That was a little bit weird. And so, that's why I understood the purpose and I was glad to be a part of it. And I felt we were progressing. And then I guess around 2015, I became aware, or someone had sent me a video which had over 1 million views that said, is your sexual orientation transphobic, or are your genital preferences transphobic? And I thought, oh, of course that's absurd. And so I assumed I'm going to be watching this video and they're going to explain to me why that is not a transphobic thing to have a sexual orientation. To my shock and disappointment, that's not what the video was explaining. Instead, it was saying that to be same-sex or opposite-sex oriented was to be phobic and a genital fetishist, which is certainly, I think that we could ask questions whether sexual orientations are really about genitals, and that's a reasonable question. But the larger point was that I was really disturbed by the message of this idea that people's orientations could be wrong. And again, that this was falling under this umbrella that I understood was exactly the opposite of that. That was not its purpose. And around the same time, I think it was Deborah Messing, I don't normally know much about. She had some, cupcake. It was like a vagina cupcakes for a Women's International Day or something like that. And I thought, great. I'm not sure how I feel about those cupcakes or whatever, but I liked the idea. We're finally acknowledging that women have bodies and we can talk about them. And suddenly, she was faced with this torrent of abuse that was inappropriate to acknowledge that the existence of vaginas on a Women's International Day. And she was, she ended up apologizing for this. And so I started questioning, I guess this raised my attention to some of these conflicting issues. And then the Equality Act and its new revision followed on the heels of that. And then I read it and thought, this is absurd. This is really poorly thought through and it has all number of problems. And I thought, surely someone is going to start talking about it. And I waited and I went to colleagues and said, have you read the Equality Act? And what do you think about that? And they said, no. And others said, don't go near that. And I waited a little bit longer. And then I realized it wasn't a hill that I want to die on because I'd prefer not to die on a hill. But it was something I was willing to talk about because I was waiting and this is horrible. And I felt really two different things. One is I felt that if people understood it, they wouldn't really be for it. And I still think that. And then I thought there was just really a lot of confusion around concepts that many people don't have the time or haven't had the ability to take classes or read the books that really distinguish between sex, gender, and the biology of sex and things like that. And at the same time, I was beginning to take courses in biology and genomics, and I was finally able to speak some facts to the kind of estimates from Fausto Sterling and others that have been criticized, but I didn't feel like I had the skills to really interpret them and understand that, how do I speak, knowledgeably about the idea that sex is binary. And so I felt like at that point I have, sex is binary with a few exceptions that don't make sex not real. And anyway, differences in sexual development are orthogonal to concerns about gender. And so I, spoke with some people who said, you're going to be attacked if you write this. And I said, that's okay. And I texted my family and they said, that's okay. And so, I thought about it, and then I came across really amazing work. Some of the people are on this chat. I got the book Feminist or Female Erasure that was kind of in the middle of this process, and then it somewhat unfolded. But so in this weird talk where I'm not normally presenting new research, and I don't know I don't want to repeat things I've already said, but I guess my key things I really have two things that I want to get across. And one is that my opposition to the Equality Act, and almost every feminist with whom I've had any conversations or read their work, is not about its aims. We all agree that the aims that everyone should have human rights to safety, employment, housing, and all these other things. And it's really the absolute horrible implication, the implementation of the act that's problematic. And we agree that the issue is the conflation of sex and gender and the explicit prioritization of gender identity over sex. And so I have some slides. I don't know if they're necessary. I could show them, but basically, if you read the text of the Equality Act, it wasn't an accident that they prioritized gender identity over sex. They did it purposely by saying, gender identity is something gender related. Of course, they don't define that, as Anne said, and it exists regardless of sex. And in the House debate over these issues, Republicans proposed, who I'm not normally in agreement with, but that's neither here nor there, proposed two amendments. One, to leave sports sex separated for reasons that are obvious, that it's about biology, not gender. And those were rejected on a party line vote. And again, to have spaces that were purposely, exclusionary of the opposite sex to remain sex separated. And those two were rejected on a party line vote. And that really made me even more concerned, I think, because the discussions that we need to be having around these issues aren't being had. And that is the second main issue concern I have around these topics is the censorship and the attacking of people who raise reasonable questions about the reality of sex. The idea that we can't say sex is real and matters and without being called phobic or hateful is absurd. And it's democratically illegitimate, as some people have noted. And so, I think that I appreciate all I've ever seen support, and at the same time had complaints, from students to my deans that I'm, a hateful, transphobic person. But at the same time, I've had a number of discussions with people who are willing to engage in these things, these issues with reason and logic and fact. And I think that's what's missing. And what I appreciate about these groups and the feminist amendments and attempts to revise the Equality Act is this focus on logic and reason and our ability to speak the truth. And so, I guess, I think the two main points that hopefully come across in my paper and in my position is that I fully support human rights, but we absolutely cannot take rights from one vulnerable group, females, and give to another group, males, or any other person, that are purposely exclusionary of them because they're vulnerable, because we're vulnerable, and that's why we have those rights in the first place. And I think of, the women in prison that I visited, they're overcrowded. There's 6 women to a tiny cell. The toilets are in the middle of the room. There's absolutely no privacy. We have overcrowding prisons and jails. I think of I've visited drug rehabilitation centers where women are exceptionally vulnerable. In both places, women have really escalated rates of experiences with male abuse and sexual abuse in particular. I think of myself in middle school and how important my, even just the sex separated bathrooms were, and female only gym classes. And I think of how important it is that we are standing up for those women, for our earlier selves and the women that come before us, and recognize that it's not hateful to stand up for our rights, and that we can extend those same human rights to other people, including transgender people, but there's no human rights to opposite sex rights. And I don't know why this is difficult for people to understand, and I hope we can discuss it more here. But I think it really is this understanding that transgender people are opposite sex people trapped in a different body. And we can have different views of the issue, but sex is a biological material reality. So whatever you believe about that, one still has a sex. And so those are the rights that need to be protected, along with extending other rights to other people. That it defines gender circularly, as we discussed, without any requirement for formal status change, which means that any male at any time can self-ID into a woman's space. So male rapist who is convicted of rape. So a male rapist who is convicted of rape can say, I identify as a woman. We can all know he's insincere. And the Equality Act would require that he be treated in every way as if he were actually female, as currently written. That's not just absurd, it's profoundly sexist. And it really undermines the safety of women everywhere. And it does so by explicitly defining sex, again, to mean a sex stereotype, includes pregnancy, childbirth, or other related medical conditions, and it defines sex as sexual orientation or gender identity, which it isn't. We all know that a female is not equal to a lesbian, which is not equal to a transgender person. In fact, those other two terms can't be defined without reference to sex. It defines gender, as we discussed, circularly. It uses gender four different times in the definition of gender identity, but it never defines it. So it's something that exists that's not sex, but it's gender related, but we don't know what that is. So that just allows anyone to use that in any way they want to for their purposes. It prohibits an individual. They added an explicit statement in the summary of the text more recently, which wasn't there before, to say that one of the goals of the bill is to prohibit an individual from being denied access to a shared facility, including a restroom, a locker room, and a dressing room that is in accordance with the individual's gender identity. And again, that was an amendment by the Republicans. They passed an amendment to change that language, and it was rejected. And as a result, it would eliminate women's sex-based rights and the right to exclude males. So places would essentially become unisex, but they would still be called sex separated. And the result is that really only predatory males, or as well as sincere trans women, would opt into these spaces. And I don't think anyone is going to reasonably argue for making spaces unisex. So hopefully we can make them aware of the fact that that's what this bill does. Sex continues to matter, and there's no human right to opposite sex provisions, which is what we're all here for. So in conclusion, and sorry you didn't get to see my slides, we must recognize sex and law as a biological reality. It is. Differences in sexual development do not undermine the reality of sex. People with those conditions absolutely deserve to be protected, but males and females still exist as a biological reality. We must retain the right to exclude based on sex when doing so as a proportionate means to a legitimate aim. And that includes spaces, events, competitions, and awards that Holly Lawford Smith, who's on here, has laid out really well. And we must continue to protect the rights of the LGBTQ alphabet, but in a different way, by creating new protected classes and new protected conditions and not redefining sex to something it is not.